Thank you, Liza. That was fantastic.
Nice.
Kimberlin, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Oh, I hear an echo. Okay. I am going to have a kitchen conversation. So I don't have slides, and that's intentional. Liza had her beautiful slides, and it was great information. And specifically about networks. And I wanted to let me just change my view here because I'm like, literally, I want to see everyone and see your reactions. Okay. Kimberlin Butler, I run Mathematica's philanthropic practice. It's a research firm. My background, yes, thank you, Liza. Please give Liza a virtual round of applause because she did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. My background has been a hybrid of public education, so we have that in common, Liza, public affairs and philanthropy. And currently, I want to just share what's interesting about this conversation is one, I want to thank Dr. Nakula because I have the pleasure of having him as the chair of my dissertation currently at Penn committee. But two, Flavio and anyone involved, Andrew and others, the fact that we're anchored in this being a global possibility network should inspire you. And the fact that we are at the first convening about this work should also inspire you. And I want to level set our understanding there because much of what I'll talk about is how foundations actually receive, possibilities, innovations, and things like that. And I just want to just honor a lot of what Liza set us up for, which is I followed the chat, and so I'll be answering some of those questions. I'm seeing Andrew's face quite a bit, so let me change it. Okay, now I see everyone. Great. The first thing I want to say is, currently I'm working in a number of foundation strategies right now. I'm currently, if we can hold in confidence, working in the middle of the Gates Foundation's president's office right now and centering all of their racial equity investments for the entire globe. And I will tell you that's a very interesting body of work. And I'm also working with a smaller foundation set their entire economic mobility strategy. And so I'll be coming from the place and position of having not only managed 3 national funder networks in education and working with just about every foundation president that you can think of connected to young people in education, but also thinking from a global perspective. So you'll kind of get both in this conversation because regardless of whether you're out of the United States or in the United States, relationships move at the speed of trust. And that's where I want to start. I think that it's important for you to know that the sector of philanthropy is not a monolith. They're not the same. I don't think that's a surprise, but I think our approaches tend to be one size fit all, right? People, think about, oh, we have to apply for a grant. Oh, we have to approach them. The reason I start with relationships moving at the speed of trust is because as you engage program officers, as you engage any foundation staff person, I don't care if you're at a conference and it's the operations person, I promise you, they are part of a larger team. They have some level of influence, and it matters how you enter the door to the foundation itself. I think Liza mentioned a bit about strategies, and I want to also go there and say that, every foundation, just like any organization, they are setting their own strategy. And much of their strategy has to do with how they want to impact or make a difference in the world. And so a lot of it is contingent upon grantees meaning you. If you become a grantee where you actually receive a grant from a foundation, they're watching closely, how you're making an impact because they want to make a social impact. And so when I think about a phrase that I created at Mathematica called evidence-informed grant making, I've seen a need, going back to logic models, as Liza was saying, to make sure that you are helping the foundations make an evidence-informed investment decision, in their strategy. And so I'm joking, I won't name the foundation, but this one foundation was like, Kimberlin, can you help us? Because we just keep writing checks and saying yes to everyone. And they're in Pennsylvania, right? I gave you a clue, but I won't tell you who they are. The problem is you might be giving dollars away to an organization that has no idea how to use the funds. They have no idea of the logic model that Liza was talking about. So even getting them to the place of understanding in the funding that you're receiving, how will you actually help them make a difference? How will you actually help them make a difference in terms of evidence to drive the impact? How are you going to show that? It's not just about an application, it's the relationship. And it's also helping them realize that they can punch above their financial weight. Most people are going to foundations just asking for money, but I would encourage you as a global network to ask for so much more. Sometimes they just want to amplify issues, right? Because they have incredible convening power. They can take risks like no other organization or entity. And so I think, if you just sort of think about what are the issues that align with the foundation strategic plan, who are the people that I need to know? Foundations, they have the president, they have program officers, there's directors of strategy. There's so many roles in foundations. And if you're very narrowly focused on a specific issue, you might think about who is the person that aligns closely to making grants in my particular issue. Go to the website, go to their annual reports, look at how their communications are sort of driving the messages that they want to share with the world. Most people sort of don't pay attention to communications, but I would argue those are the messages that they want the world to know. So you need to sort of go there. But there are some things on the website you won't ever get. And there are some sort of unsolicited grant opportunities out there. And that is why you have to build relationships. So I know a couple of folks are asking, like, how do you do that? How do you even approach and engage? I saw in the chat a lot of, because I want us to reframe and look at how we think about this. I saw in the chat a lot of sort of messages saying, how do we get to them to present our research? How do we get to them? This is not about you all the time, right? You have to think about what is it that matters most to them? What is their history? Liza mentioned Kellogg. They served on their racial equity sort of challenge committee just recently. We selected this $90 million challenge. And I will tell you, in looking through all of the applications, the ones that really stood out for bold solutions were the ones where they had done their homework and they mentioned the history of Kellogg's nearly 100 years investing over time and the evolution of their grant making. And they could clearly articulate, where does my work fit in to advance their goals, right? So it's not about you. And it's also about the greater impact that you make together, right? So think a little bit beyond you and think more about the broader impact that you want to make. Another point I want to make is COVID. Oh my gosh, COVID-19 is so important. I know I was in New Orleans just a couple of days ago and Lake Tahoe before then. No one's wearing a mask anymore. It's like COVID is a thing of the past. It's still going on, actually, and very much so in philanthropy. So I told Mike this in a conversation. If you think about how COVID, the outbreak occurred, and if you think about philanthropy's role to potentially impact, how communities respond to COVID, there may be a place for you. And how do young people sort of fit into that equation? So I'll tell you, there are 3 frames that foundations are thinking about COVID right now. There's the response, right? Oh my gosh, people are struggling. There are communities that are impoverished and they can't even manage COVID well. Then there's the recovery right now. A lot of foundations are focused on how do we get back to work? How do we get back to our schools serving young people well? How do we get back to anything? And then there's the resiliency, which is how do we plan and make investments for the future that should another pandemic happen to disrupt schools, to disrupt communities, to disrupt anything? How are we ready for that? So if you think about this network's ability to hold the line and help foundations think about that framework, I think that is a great potential opportunity. Another thing I want to mention, which I haven't heard yet, is the critical importance of equity. So my positionality, I'm a Black female in America right now, right? I care about equity so much, and I can't begin to tell you how much you watch the news. Foundations are there, more so than the federal government. I am very close to the head of the Kellogg Foundation, Lejeune Tabron. A number of Black and Brown Foundation leaders are sort of meeting behind the scenes to talk about how they will not entertain any grants or any applications if you don't really understand equity and you can really articulate equitable evaluation principles or equity principles in general. And some of those principles include nothing about us without us. So there's this sort of framework called trust-based philanthropy, which is all about making sure that you're thinking about, how you will engage grantees or those that you're sort of writing to make a difference for in your grant applications, how you're engaging them in the process of your work, right, in your project, and regularly engaging them. And how will the foundation actually connect to them as well? And so how do you advance those goals around racial equity, gender equity, disability equity. It's the intersectionality even beyond race. So I would think about that. Um, and then I think I want to just mention, foundations are learning organizations. You don't think about that often, but they're learning just like you too. And I want to stress how the IRS requires them to spend down a certain percentage of their funds and their assets. And so if you think about those individual program officers, they have a budget and they are actually required to spend those funds down. So they need you just as much as you need them. And I think most people pursuing funds always think, oh my gosh, how can I get in front of them? How can I? But I actually would encourage you to think more. I have a lot of leverage and power here. I have a solution to a challenge in the world that this foundation, if we work together, Eliza mentioned partnerships. Yes, think about who you can partner with. But I will say, if you didn't partner with anyone, it depends, right? It depends on how you measure the value of the partnership. Some foundations are okay partnering with just you. I think it's about building relationships and seeing in a regular conversation, iterative sort of creating what does a partnership look like? I think the value of this network or our network, I'm so excited to be in the network, is that we are already partnered by virtue of how this network is designed, right? So they would be interested in how are we learning from each other? How do we measure our impact over time? And what difference will this network make in the lives of young people, realizing their possibilities? And then the last thing I want to say about this is that I am personally seeing a lot of disconnect between policy, philanthropy, and practice. There are a lot of program officers just sort of making investments and their boards of trustees just making investments blindly, not actually knowing how grants are actually made on the ground. I see this personally in the Gates Foundation a lot, and we talk a lot about that right now. They're trying to figure out how do we sort of make the connection between how the investments are landing on the ground, even in the midst of the divorce and everything, people sort of get all caught up in that. But the reality is there are lots of major foundations struggling to see how do we make the connections on the ground and how do we make sure that the program officers can see that connection and how does that ladder up to the strategy? And I think that, if you think about how they learn, they're learning from their investments. So you're such a critical part in helping them learn. And as you write your proposals, or even if you're not invited to write a proposal and just start conversations, always think about the impact that you can make together. I keep using that word because it's so critical. I think the other thing I want to say is that speaking of networks, there are several funder networks, and I managed 3 of them. There are at least 100 sort of regional based funder networks. And I think you miss an opportunity. So some folks just look nationally, but there are some networks of funders which are umbrella organizations. I'll give you an example. There are umbrellas that have different foundations under them, organized by region, organized by type. For example, Grant Makers for Education is where I used to work and lead. That's a network of nearly 1,000 foundations just investing in education, right? But they also include other issues, right? But they're program officers and leaders who are focused on that and tend to be under that umbrella. There are also regional networks like Philanthropy New York, where Rona Brown runs it in New York, where it's all the New York foundations that are actually sort of coming together to think about how they want to make a regional impact. Every state has a regional network. There are also global networks of foundations, and they all convene because they have some shared alignment, shared understanding, some shared impact. And so I'll leave you with this. You want to pull up a seat to places where foundations naturally convene. Don't think about like, how can I get to them? But just start showing up where they naturally show up. That could be conferences. That can be, if you go to some of these network websites, sometimes the events are open to the public. They are generally meant just for them, so they don't like you to solicit. But remember, if you're building a relationship, it would never be a solicitation or a cold call. You never want to cold call these folks. I mean, having been a funder myself, I didn't like cold calls. I like when you have a natural relationship and you can just talk regularly on an ongoing basis and keep the relationship open so that they see you as a trusted advisor around issues. That's the important thing. This is about global social impact. The second thing is, be open to convening foundations, right? there's no rule saying that you can't convene or bring foundations to the table. Don't be so, passive, be active and say, we have something to share. So how might we host a global possibility network philanthropic convening where funders are invited to actually learn not about what we're doing, but learn how they can make a difference, right? And sort of like what we can do together. That's not happening. And there's no one saying it can't happen. The other thing is, how do you, okay, I'll answer that in just a moment. The last thing I'll say is, think about how you set the table to engage foundations as a researcher or sort of wherever you sit in this space. And if you're currently, for example, on a project or currently engaged with a foundation, continue to think about how do you build the next level of work, right? For example, I'm working with the Wallace Foundation quite a bit. And in regular conversations, I'm always talking about what do you want to do next, right? It's okay to talk about what's next because that's a strategy around business development that allows you to keep the door open for new conversations. And you're also regularly learning about their strategies and what they care about regularly. So let me go into the chat. I think Mike or someone asked, how do we make the first call without it being a cold call? Well, that's the thing. You're not making a call. And that's what I want to stress. You should not be calling anyone and saying, hi, I'm Mike Nakala. Want to tell you about the Global Possibility Network. What you should be doing is sort of figuring out where are foundations sort of showing up, leveraging individual relationships and social capital, Liza, Kimberlin, whomever, who do you know? What are the top 10 youth investing sort of foundations, that, we might be able to sit down and just have a conversation with? And I would not ask for a thing in those conversations. It is truly about sharing and an authentic exchange. Because guess what? Funders can sense when you just want to sit down for money. And just like any relationship, you will not date a person who just wants you for certain things, right? You want to build a relationship over time. And so that's how you do it. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Philanthropy News Digest. Yes, stay abreast regularly. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I want to hear your questions because there's so much to learn about, how to approach philanthropy and where to start.
Just let me do a quick time check here, folks. This is just enormously important. And I know Carrie Guo, our next presenter, is in China, and it's 11 o'clock at night. So where are we within our time schedule, Andrew?
So we're running over a little bit.
How much is a little
bit? Well, Carrie was supposed to have finished at 10:50. So
okay. So let's even, despite the importance of the funding piece, let's get two questions out there, and we have to wrap it up so we can get to Carrie and Andrew Hill. Okay, can we take a couple of, or Andrew, maybe a couple of questions?
So I in the interest of time, I'm glad we're recording this, Kimberlin, because the amount of insights that you have offered, and Liza, of course, this is so important to us because we just want to do what we want to do for the world, for us. We have things to do, and so, but you need funding to do it. And so I love the framing here that you've offered, Kimberlin, of, there should be a meeting of interests. And, I love that idea of the, happening at the speed of trust, that, you can't rush things. There has to be some trust built over time. I love that. That's fantastic. I think just in the interest of time, we probably will have to wrap it up at this point. But Kimberlin, thank you so much for your expertise. It's been fantastic. And Liza, also wonderful stuff. I mean, so useful and helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys can find me on LinkedIn and reach out anytime. And I'll be plugged in with Andrew and Mike. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you.